and it can be human corrected.
Helping the communities that are on the front lines of this crisis.
Your voice is the most important thing you have, because even if you can speak to one person, you are influencing some kind of change.
It's up to all of us. There's more than enough resources for everyone on this planet.
I personally have an idealized image of what the future of activism would look like.
I see an increased participation of young people in our local government, grassroots movements, and elections, particularly at the local level.
I envision a future where everyone's needs are fulfilled.
We're making our voices heard.
Finding ways to connect with people on a more human level.
We are the change makers.
And I think that as technology develops, we'll find new and more efficient ways to mobilize and get people to take action.
Bringing communities together for change.
Together we can make a difference.
We are not just talking about the issues.
Actively doing something beyond ourselves.
Set yourself aside and reflect on the most important problems now.
It's now or never. Let's take action today for a better tomorrow.
Please welcome author, seasoned Democratic strategist, and co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend, Simone Sanders Townsend. The Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, His Excellency Gaston Brown. Global Citizen co-founder and CEO, Hugh Evans. Award-winning actor, playwright, Global Citizen, and UN Women Goodwill Ambassador, Denai Gurira. Cisco Executive Vice President and Chief People, Policy, and Purpose Officer, Fran Katsoudas.
Well, all right then. Good afternoon, Global Citizen. Oh, y'all can do better than that. Good afternoon. And welcome to Global Citizen Now, where we convene around ideas for urgent impact. And in turn, we're gonna use those ideas to generate some action, all right? Somebody say action.
Action.
And we need that action because we have to make sure everyone's basic needs are met, that our planet is flourishing, and frankly, every person in every country can prosper. So welcome, I'm excited to kick this off for you all. Okay, Hugh, I'm gonna start with you because you're the boss, and we like to start with the boss. And this is the third year right now of the Global Citizen Now Summit. What do you hope the outcome is of the next 2 days? And tell folks why this particular gathering is different.
Well, firstly, thank you so much, Simone, for being part of Global Citizen Now, and thank you to all of you for being here and part of the movement. Really, the thing that makes Global Citizen Now so unique is that we're driving urgent action to tackle the world's greatest challenges and end extreme poverty within our lifetime. And so every single panel that you'll see over the next few days is tied to a specific call to action. Most summits you go to, a lot of words, and they're wonderful words, but we need to actually drive real action to create change at this urgent time for the planet. And so over the next few days, the other thing that makes this interaction so different is when you go to the UN General Assembly, or if you might go to Davos, they're often closed-door meetings. All the conversation happens behind closed doors, whereas you can see at Global Citizen, we're bringing together business leaders, we're bringing together political leaders, we're bringing together artists and advocates, and most importantly, citizens, representing our 12 million members all around the world. So over the next few days, I'm really hoping we can achieve 3 big things. Firstly, we really need a breakthrough for the planet, and so we're focusing on supporting the Amazon rainforest. We have obviously Anita, who's with us, as well as representatives of the Brazilian government, because we're working in partnership in the lead up to the COP gathering next year to try to secure an additional $1 billion from philanthropy and from business to help reforest the Amazon. The second goal we're focused on is investment in Africa, because we know right now that many of the G20 nations are not keeping their promises, and now is the moment to double down and keep their promises to ensure that the 75 of the world's poorest nations have access to cheap or free lines of credit so they can ultimately be debt-free and not shackled by the burdens of debt that often hold people back. And thirdly, we really need to make sure that those people who are in the midst of conflict and crisis around the world, we're seeing it in Ukraine, we're seeing it in Gaza, we're seeing it in South Sudan, in Yemen, all around the world, and it's mostly children who are victims. And so we're trying to raise $600 million to support Education Cannot Wait so that every child in conflict and crisis zone does not miss out on a year of quality education. If we achieve those things, then I'll leave the next few days and the next few months like we've, as a movement, made a positive step forward in a very complex world.
Ooh, oh, we can clap for that. I mean, it's a tall order. We've got 2 days and a good room and some great panels. I'm confident we can get it done. Fran, look, I was just at the Bureau before I came here, and it is hard to escape bad news, just daunting headlines these days. Let's build off what Hugh just said. Where can folks find some optimism, particularly young people?
I was just talking to Jane Rosenthal a few minutes ago, and we were talking about storytelling and the amazing stories that are out there, and how so many people, as we make the time to get a little bit curious and spend time, I think we learn stories about resilience, we learn stories about heroism, action. I think the first thing that I would say for all of us is just to take the time to listen to those stories, because they fuel us. They create a level of energy. The other thing that I would say is that I do think we have to learn, all of us, to not get too tied up in some of the acronyms that are out there today that have become so political. And so I think about ESG, I think about DEI. What I realize is that if we can move from the acronym and double click on what the work is trying to do for the world, for people, for communities, I think we find that there's so much that we have in common. And the last thing that I would say is, as I think about tonight, we are going to see young people that have done amazing things around the world. It shows the power of what one person can do. And I think it also demonstrates the accountability that we have when we see that one person, to do everything that we can to help them be successful and thrive.
Yes, yes. Look, young people are not the future. I think we are the right now. As a millennial, I'm holding it down for the millennials, and the Gen Zs are even doing better than we are. Mr. Prime Minister, can we, when we talk about buzzwords, I often think about the term climate change or climate crisis, and especially in the news media, people throw those words around, but I think we need to drill down. Talk about extreme weather. They are really becoming the norm in 2024. In 2017, the world watched in horror as Hurricane Irma destroyed Antigua and Barbuda. Can you just talk about the importance of global collaboration, both when it comes to response, but also when it comes to prevention? And I just like to tell everybody that the Prime Minister is also a farmer, okay? So an actual farmer. So we can clap for the farmers. So he is someone that is close to this issue in many ways.
Thank you very much. I am indeed a farmer, making sure I make my contribution to food security. Having said that, the issue of climate is the most significant existential threat facing all of humanity. And whereas I've been asked to speak about the situation in Barbuda, we have to recognize that practically every country on the planet is actually suffering from these climate events. In fact, we're literally destroying the earth. And it requires collaboration by all stakeholders, by policymakers, by businessmen, businesswomen, philanthropists to come together to fight this climate crisis. I recall back in 2017 when our sister island Barbuda was decimated by Hurricane Irma. It was like a mangled wreck. In fact, at that time, we wondered precisely what would we do. I mean, whether or not the island would be habitable in the future. It was actually deemed to be inhabitable at the time, to the extent that we had to vacate all of the residents of Barbuda to our sister island, Antigua. And that was certainly one of the most powerful storms that we would have seen. In fact, since then, we have seen many more storms. They're more ferocious. They are certainly more impacting, they're more frequent. And as a consequence, small island states globally are suffering. In fact, their civilization is now imperiled. But again, as I said, it's not limited to small island states. Most countries have coastal communities, and those coastal communities are also under threat. So this requires a collective action of all of humanity to address this most significant existential threat that is facing all of humanity. We only have a single planet. We don't have a planet B. And therefore, all of us, each of us, must be committed to addressing this issue by ensuring that we reduce emissions, by holding the large polluters accountable. They must understand that they cannot continue to put profits over the planet. We have to protect our planet in the interest of all civilization, in ensuring that we preserve our common humanity. And therefore, I want to certainly commend Global Citizen Now for bringing us together as stakeholders as we address this most significant threat facing all of humanity and our planet.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. You know, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that the effects of extreme climate events, like the Prime Minister just referenced, they disproportionately affect women and girls. And Fran, to that point, lifting up women and girls is something that Cisco has been committed to for well over 25 years, especially through bridging the educational divide. Can you just talk a little bit about the Cisco Network Academy and the impact that that is having across the world?
Yeah, I'm really happy to. I think we all realize that digital skills are so critical. Skills, education are so critical for all of us. I think the thing that's changed from a private sector perspective is there's this realization that talent comes to you with so many different paths. I think that's new. At Cisco, we have trained 20 million students over the last 25 years. And when I think about...
I'm sorry, hold on. People just breezed past the number. What was the number?
It was 20 million.
20 million.
We offer this training for free. It's something that we want to make available. I think right now we're hearing so much around the world around AI and cybersecurity. What I need to let you know is that, unfortunately, women and underrepresented minorities are not represented in this new and incredibly exciting path, and we have to work so hard to change this. If I look at the continent of Africa right now from a cybersecurity perspective, only 9% of the workers in this space are women. We have to change that. The most amazing thing about this opportunity is that these technologies are just starting from an AI perspective, even from a security perspective. And so we have an opportunity right now to double down on education, which we're doing. From a Cisco perspective, we're committed to training another 20 million people over the next 10 years. We want to do a ton more in cybersecurity and AI, and we want to make sure that we make it available for all.
Let's stay on the continent. We can clap. Do not be afraid to clap. I like an engaged audience. We're trying to start off strong here at Global Citizen Now. I like it. They're awake, Hugh. That means they're with us. You know, let's stay on the continent, because Denai, you took to the Global Citizen stage in Accra in 2022. And can you just talk a little bit about the challenges rooted in what folks refer to as a legacy of colonialism that countries like those in Africa and, frankly, in the Caribbean face?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's actually become more and more clear to me that we are so far from uprooting ourselves from colonialism and the legacy that is still very much in place. I'm Zimbabwean, by the way. I'm born in Iowa, but grew up in Zimbabwe.
Shout out to the Midwest.
Shout out to the Midwest.
To the Nebraskans in the room.
First gen, but African raised. And definitely grew up in Africa, grew up in Zimbabwe right after its independence, right into its various stages. And really the realization, looking at things from the macro level, is that we are still under systems of neocolonialism. Like, it just shifted, like from the slave trade to colonization to neocolonization. And there's many things that are at play. There's the fact that it has really often been said, it's being said more and more blatantly lately, that really the reliance of the Western world, and often the Far East as well, is on our raw materials, our raw resources, and keeping their stability as first world forces, so-called, it's intrinsic that we remain impoverished. So there's a very specific balance going on between how the so-called first world works with the third world. I mean, Jacques Chirac said in 2010, basically, France would be a third world power if it were not for Africa. And there are ways that they still rely, Francophone nations are relied upon by France to maintain its first world status. So that is across the continent. If you look at even who's in control of a lot of our natural resources, I mean, we're ridiculously wealthy, from the coltan, to the cobalt, to the lithium, to the diamonds, to the rubber, to the oil. I mean, we can go on all day, but often you don't see us in control of it. Now, we also have a leadership issue, okay? This is complex, it's not just one-sided. And the leadership issue is also very much, a part of how places like, the United States, for instance, has destabilizes nations to keep certain leaders in power, to keep things destabilized in their favor. This has been going on for decades. So how do we get to the end of it? Well, the realization that the fact that the simple solution isn't about only saying, hey, West, give more to Africa. It's also about really dismantling a structure that works intrinsically against Africa being self-determined and being able to take care of itself, which it is more than capable of doing.
It's giving leadership matters. If I can switch back to climate for a moment and talk about your leadership, Mr. Prime Minister, you have actually been calling on nations to get serious about the fight to phase out fossil fuels. What message do you have for fellow leaders who continue to drag their feet on this issue? And what do you say to those folks that say, it's just a little too ambitious?
Well, it is quintessential that all leaders globally commit themselves to reducing emissions and certainly to phase out the use of fossil fuels. To do otherwise, obviously, is to imperil the planet and all of human civilization. So my simple message is for the leaders to show greater commitment and to certainly adopt new technologies to increase the transition into renewables. At the same time, to ensure that we do not exceed the 1.5 degree threshold, because we all know that if that 1.5 degree threshold is actually exceeded, then evidently it could be catastrophic for a number of states, including small states. But I also believe too that leaders globally need to show some level of climate responsibility. I'm also of the view too that voters need to hold their leaders responsible. Because ultimately, you're the ones who will determine their success. I mean, many leaders are obviously captured by certain organizations, especially the fossil fuel organizations, the lobbyists and so on, and they need to liberate themselves, and they need to understand they have a responsibility to all of humanity. They have a responsibility to preserve and protect the planet. And ultimately, it will be the people, the voters, who will have to keep them responsible to make sure that they commit themselves to phase out the use of fossil fuels, not to be going to COP after COP after COP after COP every year, making these pledges, and at the same time without any real commitment to achieving the reduction in emissions. So in essence, they've been gaming the system, and I'm of the view too that other than holding them responsible with the vote, perhaps too that small island states in particular and developing countries globally, like-minded countries, should consider legal options. In fact, Antigua and Barbuda and Tuvalu would have put an advisory question or to get a legal advice as to whether or not these large polluters, if they are literally violating the UNCLOS treaty. And similarly, Vanuatu would have gone to the ICJ to make that determination. I believe that these are the actions that are also needed to complement the voluntary pledges that have been made, many of which have not been satisfied. Ultimately, as I said before, we only have a single planet. There's no planet B, and we have to hold the policy maker responsible, and we also have to help them to liberate themselves from the organizational capture, to force them to be committed so that they can address this issue, this most significant existential threat facing all of humanity, and also to ensure that there's no further displacement of poor and vulnerable individuals, and so that all of us could achieve resilient prosperity.
Denai, you also have a call to action. You are launching an action campaign on the Global Citizen app, and that relates to the protection of women and girls in conflict zones like Darfur. Can you tell us how this audience here, not just in the room, but on the Zooms, as I like to say, can support?
Yeah, well, I have to start by giving some context. When we say the actual call to action is around conflict-related sexual violence. And I think it's something that shockingly is talked about much less than it should be. It's actually extremely urgent and astoundingly dire. We just saw the UN report about this come out, which is showing that the issue is actually increasing. It's not decreasing, which means that when there's a conflict, when there's war, when there's any type of thing like that, it's almost like a rule of combat for there to be wretchedly horrific atrocities committed upon the bodies of women, girls, and children. To the point where we're talking about atrocities that are almost unthinkable, that are happening systemically across various countries across the globe. The focus that I have as an African connects to Darfur, connects to Sudan, where about exactly almost a year ago, unfortunately, a new conflict began. We've heard from the UN, it's also connected to one of the worst, possibly worst human famine issues we've ever seen. And everyone's left, everyone's gone. So you basically have no protections for the women and the girls and the children. But right now we have to remember that that sort of an issue, I could go into the stories, there's so many, and this call to action will reveal those stories to people, because people have to understand these are girls and women who had hopes and aspirations and dreams that are being ripped away from them, families being broken apart. It's like you can't think about, oh, I'm gonna just go to the store today or walk across the street or wake up and feel safe in my home. We're talking about 12-year-olds who, Niamat Ahmadi, who's an amazing woman from Darfur, who runs the Darfur Women's Action Group, who you will learn about in this call to action. She tells a story of a 12-year-old girl who was gang raped, and her parents had to decide between feeding her younger sibling or taking her for treatment. And she just looked at her mother and said, I just don't want to live. That should never be a situation a child should ever have to face. And we're looking at the fact that two big issues that we have to push for. We've seen it done before. We saw it happen 20 years ago with the Darfur Now movement. It can be done when you can push as a collective, as a global citizen collective, for difference, for change, for policies, for acknowledgement. A lot of this stuff is happening in the dark. When it happens in the dark, it doesn't get dealt with. And so one of the biggest issues we face, one of the things that we want to push in this campaign, is the fact that impunity must end. There is this basically a default concept that you can rape a child, you can rape a woman, you can walk into that home, do whatever you want. In Ethiopia, this is a horrifying trend of tying girls to trees and raping them publicly and leaving them there. You can do that and nothing will be done to you. There's nothing in place to hold those men accountable. That is unacceptable as citizens of this world. And we can stand up and push against this sort of action being the default action, against the leaders. There's leaders who won't even acknowledge the issue. There's some who've acknowledged it, but they haven't implemented the systems of justice. There are ways that people just get away with it. That needs to be addressed. Also, the disarmament issue. The fact that over the course of the last 9 years, we've seen military spending go up to $2.4 trillion. Spending on actually dealing with this issue, supporting women and girls, taking care of them, protecting them, and preventing this was at $150 million. That's 0.01%. And the more that you look at it in Darfur, in Haiti, in the DRC, wherever you look, Ethiopia, all of the perpetrators are armed to the teeth. So the more weaponry, the more the violence against women and girls. That is something that must be held to account. The embargoes are constantly being completely ignored, violated. We have to push leaders. We have to push the people accountable to account. And that's what this will do. The beauty of Global Citizen is that it can bring a lot of attention to a topic that is not getting attention across a great swath of humans like yourselves and various others. So please do check out when we have it live, which will be very shortly. You'll be able to hear this amazing woman, Amadi, speak to the UN Council, which I spoke to also last week. You'll hear her words. You'll hear the words of a woman who's been on the ground, who's been through a genocide, and who's telling us what we can do. And we'll have actable ways for you to be a part, because we can make this stop, and it's up to us.
It is up to us. Today at Global Citizen, we are dragging the things that are happening in the dark into the light to address them. I'd like to thank my guests. We have an incredible program this afternoon, folks. I do believe the second gentleman, Douglas Emhoff, is in the building, as well as 4-time Grammy-nominated Mickey Guyton will join us. Come on, clap for Mickey Guyton and the second gentleman. Verizon CEO is here, Hans Vestberg, an actor and humanitarian. I'm just gonna Jaimin Hunsu, folks, is in the building. But first, with those closing, we'll have some additional words from Hugh in just a bit. I want to turn your attention to the following video about a major initiative for the African continent. Take a listen.
In 2023, Global Citizen launched the Power Our Planet campaign. It set out to accomplish 3 main things. 1. Call on the World Bank to pause the debt repayments of countries affected by natural disasters. 2. Call on the private sector to reduce carbon emissions and commit to the race to zero. And 3. Call on development banks to free up funding for the world's poorest countries to eradicate extreme poverty. 2 months later, the Power Our Planet event took place in Paris in front of 20,000 people who had taken action. It delivered huge wins for vulnerable countries to pause their debt repayments to the World Bank following natural disasters. But we have unfinished business. In 2024, Power Our Planet aims to secure an additional $6 billion annually in new resources from G20 countries for the World Bank's fund, helping vulnerable countries end extreme poverty. It's called IDA, and to extend debt pause clauses for the poorest and most vulnerable countries. Join us in Côte d'Ivoire on October 9th and 10th for an economic summit presented by Global Citizen and Bridgewater Associates to support social and economic development across the African continent. Now is the time to power our planet.
Please put your hands together for the CEO of Bridgewater Associates, Nir Bardea. Global Citizen co-founder and CEO, Hugh Evans. Award-winning actor, playwright, Global Citizen, and UN Women Goodwill Ambassador, Denai Gurira. Founder and chairman of Harith General Partners, Tsepo Makloele.
The so-called First World contributes the most to global challenges, but it is the so-called Third World that bears the brunt of those actions, and that is unjust. This is a legacy of colonization. It is a legacy still alive and well in the global financial system that keeps too many countries in a vicious cycle of debt and poverty, and gives many countries that perpetuated colonization continued unfettered access to the natural resources of several African countries. The reversal of this entrenched oppressive system sometimes seems insurmountable. But to begin to turn a new page and rectify these injustices, a year ago, on this stage, the first chapter of the Global Citizens Power Our Planet campaign was launched. It called for governments to deliver on promises made, from big polluters to step up on climate change, and for development banks to reform their practices, to release funding to address health, education, climate crisis, and food insecurity.
The campaign's successes included a new debt pause option for 45 countries suffering following natural disasters, and $500 million from the Rockefeller Foundation to build solar power grids in communities in Haiti, and electrify 10,000 buses in India. But despite these achievements, further reform in the global financial system is needed. We need G20 nations to increase their investment into the IDA fund by 25% to provide zero or no interest loans to 75 of the world's poorest countries so that they can truly eradicate extreme poverty within our lifetime.
Africa's potential for growth over the next 30 years is enormous, especially for its growing youth population. But in order to achieve lasting results, we need to fix key problems. At Harroth, our major infrastructure investments have shown the potential to disrupt entire economies, produce step change, and improve in economic and social opportunities. Over a decade ago, we unlocked a new growth potential by investing in the Henry Konan Bridge in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. By linking two parts of the city that were not directly connected previously, this project has been able to spur development in new geographic areas, and a key outcome for us was the urbanization around the bridge increased by more than 20% between 2013 and 2017. We rewired how the whole of Abidjan's residents work and live. More projects like the Henry Konan Bridge that transform urban economies on the continent are possible and needed, especially with the rapid urbanization of the African population. Adequately funding such projects will be critical. The World Bank's International Development Association program aims to reduce poverty by offering concessional loans and grants to the world's poorest developing countries. This has been funded by contributions from the world's wealthiest nations, meeting every 3 years to replenish those resources. The next meeting will be in December.
So ahead of the next IDA replenishment cycle, Global Citizen is campaigning to unlock an additional $6 billion in resources to support social and economic development on the African continent. Bridgewater Associates are pleased to partner with Global Citizen to build on the momentum of the Power Our Planet campaign to encourage G20 countries to increase their commitment to IDA, to support the World Bank for IDA ahead of the replenishment, and to advocate for domestic resource mobilization for African governments to allocate funds towards critical sectors. And we are proud to announce this week that we will support Global Citizen's efforts to run a public advocacy campaign in support of increased investments in Africa and deliver an economic summit in Côte d'Ivoire this October. This summit will serve as a platform to advocate for increased support in IDA 21 through direct donor contributions and public campaigning and raise awareness about IDA's impact. We ask you to join us and support for increased financing from governments, which may lead to an announcement of early pledges and commitments for IDA's replenishment.
Please join us. Thank you.
Coming up, actor and humanitarian Jaimon Hansu.
Hey Hans.
Hey.
What are you doing here?
I'm out running.
You want to go for a run?
Why don't you run with Hans?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right. You have 2 kids.
Yes, I have.
Which one's your favorite? How does your relationship with your dad influence the way that you are a father to your kids?
I think he is probably the biggest influencer in my life. He was my coach from I was 6 years old.
He was your handball coach?
Yeah, until I was 21 and I went semi-professional.
Is there an artist you'd like to see perform at Global Citizen Festival?
I have to say my favorites are Coldplay. Anita from Brazil is of course another favorite.
So how'd you get into tech?
I think early on when I started work at Ericsson, I saw the impact of getting people connected, getting mobility and broadband all around the world. And then I stayed for work for Ericsson for 28 years.
What are you most proud about your work at Verizon?
I'm proud of that. It's a fantastic company with fantastic values and doing great things, connecting people.
I know you're passionate about closing the digital divide. How do you plan to do that?
I set up a project with World Economic Forum 2021 to connect 1 billion people. So far we have come to 784 million people connected. It's a way to use the platform of Verizon, but also doing something that's really important in our society.
So I never really asked you, where are you running to?
Right now, I'm running to Global Citizen now.
All right, well, we'll see you there.
See you there.
We're excited. Bye.
Please give a warm welcome to Bloomberg technology anchor Caroline Hyde and Verizon Chairman and Chief Executive Officer Hans Vestberg.
What a fun video. It is a joy to be here. It is a joy to be alongside Global Citizen. It is a joy to be with you, Hans. Not running a 5K.
Exactly.
I'm going to do the painful pun because that was a short run, maybe 5K. It's a marathon, not a sprint, when we're getting to things like closing the digital divide. Now, I want to understand the scale of the problem. Can you articulate just how difficult it is right now for people to actually get access?
So the positive is that the last 4 or 5 years we've added 1 billion people more to be digitally included. It's roughly 5.5 billion in the world that is having access to internet. But it's 2.6 billion today that still are not connected. And we all know being connected, you're part of our society. You can work, you can get education, you can get digital information. It's so important. So out of 2.6 billion people that are not connected on this earth today, roughly 90% of them are actually covered by broadband in some kind of fashion.
90%?
90%. And then you ask me, so why are you not using it? So there are different problems in different countries, but basically you need to break it down in 3 things. The access to the technology, there has to be some broadband. There are still 400 or 500 million people on this earth that is outside the grid. And then the second part is affordability. You need to be able to afford it. And that's not only to have the plan for broadband or wireless, it's to have a device. In many countries, that's very expensive to have. And finally, it has to be usability. It has to be digital education, digital healthcare, and other societal important application to actually be important for digital inclusion. Many of us sitting here, we think that being digitally included, we can stream YouTube or something like that. But here we talk about, it shouldn't matter where you're born, where you come from, or where you live. You should have the same chance wherever you come from, and that you can have if you're digitally included. You can apply for a job, you can get the job, all of that, and you can learn which others that are inside the digital divide can do. So that's why the 2.6 billion people is very important to address together with countries and with companies to see that we're actually shrinking that.
When you look at the learning side of the equation, I know that's something that Verizon's doing deeply. So you already say, look, most people actually have access in some way of they've got broadband they could tap into. Why are you looking at the education piece in particular, and what are you doing about that here in the United States?
So if you look what Verizon is doing, we have Citizen Verizon, where we connect our business to things that are important in our society. One of those goals is to make digital inclusion for 10 million students. Getting students in the toughest areas where there are no connectivity to actually be part of it. So we have roughly 600 schools around the country where we have broadband into the school. We give them a device, and we give them digital STEM education. And they have to use them all 3, because then you really get to the root of it. So far, our commitment over 10 years is to educate 10 million students. We have done 7 million so far, and we have 6 years left. So we're going to do 10 million students in the low-income areas of the United States. Those schools are going to get broadband from us. And then I use my employees to be volunteers, so they are part of the journey as well, to educate, maintain equipment, etc. So for us, it's an ecosystem. But then you ask me, why are you doing it? It's my business. My business is doing broadband. My business is to get children to understand and use digital tools. And ultimately, they might remember Verizon, and then they're going to be a customer. Who knows?
Okay, so it's good business. But do your investors get that? Do they see the long-term benefits rather than, margin today, revenue today, profit today?
I think that when you go away from the acronyms that everybody talks about and talk about what you're doing that is part of your business, everybody understands it. Because There are many acronyms like ESG, D&I, and all of that. Talk about what you're doing and why that is connected to your business. For me to get broadband, to get youth to use our service, and then educate themselves with STEM, they might even end up working for me. And we have been on to this Verizon Innovative Learning for more than 10 years, and we keep all the school, we continue with them, and many of the children that started with us in the first and the second grade, they are now actually have graduated, and they are out in the work life, and they will always remember how they get their part of being digitally included. So for us, this is an ecosystem that is so important for us, for our business, for being even more prosperous.
Can I just take a step back? And for a moment, as two Europeans who've come to the US,
How can you hear?
Why are we here? Well, because it's the biggest economy in the world.
Yes.
And there are 10 million children that need to be educated in STEM by you.
Yes.
In the biggest economy in the world.
Yes.
What is the US government doing about affordable connectivity? Because all I can see is actually they're pulling back on some of the funding for it.
So historically, and now we come into a little more complicated, historically US or still have ACP, which is affordable connectivity plans, meaning that low-income families can get a subsidy to get broadband or wireless connectivity. Now there's a discussion in the Congress if they're going to vote about it again. But I have talked to many governments, and there are different challenges in different countries, but doing subsidy for low-income families to getting connected is so important because they can be part of it. They can apply for a job. They can work remotely. I mean, there are so many remote works today, customer care, etc., and other works they can do, consultancy, etc. So being part of that and having access to that makes it you can grow. You'll be part of our society. It's so important for the whole country, for GDP growth and all of that.
I mean, yes. And for me, that still needs to resonate so much that we're even talking about children here in the United States that need corporate philanthropy to be able to learn, to earn, and to be able to afford affordable devices. Where have you seen the most tangible benefits? You've talked about how you're getting out there 10 million children. How already has some of the impact that you've thought about the digital divide already come to bear for productivity even here in the US?
I think here in the US, I mean, I think in the whole world, I mean, we saw coming out from COVID, I think that nobody could say that being connected is not important. Yeah. You couldn't do your work, you couldn't get information, you needed to be connected. And that is not in the US, it's all around the world. We saw countries like India flourishing to setting the digital divide very high up to see that they're connecting. They got the COVID subsidies to families, to mobile phones. Things we never thought could happen, but that triggered the whole world to think differently. And I usually say that the 21st century's infrastructure, that's mobility, broadband, and cloud, because then you can bring down the cost and you can reach any person on this earth that wants to be part of our society.
Why is it your calling? Have you ever, since you've been in the world of telecoms, thought this is just something that is impossible to ignore? Or has it become worse and worse the more we've become seeing education necessary through technology, healthcare necessary through technology?
I think it started probably some 15, 20 years ago. I worked with the MDGs for the younger generation. That was the Millennium Development Goals. That was before the SDGs. And I went to Africa many times and I connected villages. And I remember vividly when I went to Ethiopia, for example, and we turned on internet in the community. The sheer, how positive, how happy they were, and how thankful that we are now part of a society. We can now get information as well. It started there. Then I have been my long life mission to see that whatever I can do from the platform I have and from the company I'm running, still with the technology and still with the business and strategy we have, I'm going to do everything to see that I can close the digital divide.
Let's talk about not just the digital divide here in the US. But there's a digital divide globally, and that's something that you in particular have tried to harness, tried to focus on, tried to reduce, and what you've got an eye on 1 billion people. Can you talk us through it?
Yeah, so we came out from that COVID, and I felt that now it's time for me to do something greater on the global basis. I decided together with World Economic Forum to set up a program over 5 years to see that we connect 1 billion people more. That started in the beginning of 21, and what it's all about is that not only getting broadband, as I said, it was about broadband, but it was either to be digital education, healthcare, or financially included digitally. Because those three things were so important coming out of COVID. So the only way we would count the new additions was actually if they are into that. And today we basically have 137 countries being part of it, 160 different champions doing commitments. My commitment is, or Verizon's commitment, is 10 million students that we're committing. And every company or government being part of it, they are committing to it. So that's how it started. We are now have 320 different programs around the world.
320?
320, I think that's a number. And we have passed 784 million people in less than two and a half years that has been included.
Can we just, 784 million in 2.5 years. Okay, so I'm playing devil's advocate, greenwashing.
Yeah.
Tell me how you measure this.
No, so that was one of the first things. So we have actually a team, we have an auditing team from a very reputable auditing firm, auditing all the commitments done by governments or by the companies. Whatever they're committing and that they're succeeding with the result. We have quarterly reporting and we do an annual report. We are on a second report because we started 21, 22nd, year 22 was the second year, and then 23 and 24. And as said, the goal is 1 billion. We're on 784. I think we're going to be ahead of the 5 years by far.
Is it 2.6 billion you said currently don't
so
have?
this is part of the 2.6 billion that we're shrinking to 2.6 billion.
And how, if you're sat in this audience right now, you're feeling pretty inspired by you going out there, sticking your neck out on a 1 billion target, how can they help?
I think that any organization, any structure that is actually having part of the strategy to see that we're including people digitally on this earth can be part of it. And the beauty of it, it has to be sort of private-public because you cannot solve it yourself. I mean, usually building networks to 99% is private capital. It's guys like me building networks. When it comes to affordability, it actually works together with governments if you're going to subsidize and all of that. And then to create sort of usability, healthcare, education, or financial inclusion digitally, mainly that's owned by governments. So you have to do it crossover, if not, you're not going to succeed. So anyone that is working with those type of things and think that they can help and have an organization that commit, they're welcome to join the Edison Alliance that we're running in order to see that we bridge that gap and reduce it with 1 billion in less than 5 years.
And let's tackle the full 2.6 billion. Hans, it's an inspiration. Thank you very much. Keep up with the running. Keep up with the marathon.
Thank you.
We appreciate it all so much.
The promise of the digital world, an amazing connected landscape for everyone. The reality is that for many, that promise has not been fulfilled. At Verizon, we are committed to help fulfill the promise of the digital world. That's why for over a decade, we've been working to close the digital divide. We're bringing our powerful high-speed internet to more homes, empowering students and teachers with the latest technology and training, and we're assisting local businesses as they prepare for success in the digital economy. Verizon, helping fulfill the promise of the digital world, encouraging opportunities for everyone.
Please give a warm round of applause for the Chief Content Officer of Forbes, Randall Lane. Actor humanitarian, chairman of the Jaimin Hansu Foundation, Jaimin Hansu. And founder and chairman of Harith General Partners, Tsepo Maklowele.
All right. This panel is the urgency of now. This is GC Now. And we've got a now panel. And I'm going so much, it's so now, I am going to Botswana on Friday. I'm jumping on a plane right after this because you got to look at why now? You got to look at the numbers. We have 1.2 billion people living in sub-Saharan Africa. 70% are under 30. We need to create jobs, jobs. And we got two people who are working really hard to create that system, and we got to do it right now. First, speaking of now, Tsepo, welcome back. And noted this. You've had a big week here, not just today, but the economic summit that was announced with Bridgewater and Global Citizen this October in Cote d'Ivoire. Harris is a big part of that, and maybe you could tell us what role you're going to play in that summit in October.
Thanks for that, Randall. I think we've been developing and infrastructure across the continent for the past over the past 18 years, and when you then see an initiative of Global Citizen partnering with Bridgewater to try and get more sort of like private sector capital to the continent, I mean, we can't be more sort of like happier than that to see these sort of like leading brands and agitating for private sector capital to come and support the replenishment place of IDA, but in addition to that, ensuring that the private sector can come and be a large part of that, because public-private partnerships are what is needed, and that's sort of like long-term capital as well.
It's true, and that the private sector can't do it by themselves, and the public sector, to really be sustainable, you need both. You're focused on infrastructure, really. I mean, so tell us what your philosophy is there.
I think what we believe is that
until... How you define infrastructure, because it's not just roads, right?
Yeah, I think we look at, mobility, that's logistics in all its various forms. We're looking at energy and power. We're looking at the telecommunications sector. We're looking at water and sanitation projects. But I think in the last while, what we've been focusing a lot more on from a platform point of view is that on the issue of mobility and energy. Because until you address the issues of mobility and energy for the continent, you're not going to help aggregate the continent's economies to sort of doing that. And as you've said, you've got it's now getting closer to 1.4 billion people, and the median age being 18. You really have a challenge, how then do you get this global dividend of growth also being felt across the African continent? Yep. So therefore, the type of initiatives like this, which then agitate for long-term capital, on the same basis, which can say that we can invest on the continent of Africa, which has coincidentally also lower default rates in project finance, transactions of just over 5%. In Asia, it's 6.1%. South America, it's just over 10%. So the risk on the continent is not as perhaps it's really made out to be. And we are really urging for the much more longer-term capital, from fund managers, and then to be able to get this towards the continent.
Again, long-term's the key, because we need to build this last line. John, you're doing a lot of work here too. Now you're from Benin. You're just right down the road from Cote d'Ivoire. Give us a sense of what it's like, the economic kind of situation is like in West Africa right now.
The economic sense of Benin, Republic of Benin, where I was born, a place that is between Togo and Nigeria. A beautiful place, but yet deprived of a lot of things. Obviously, the immediate trading good of the country is agriculture, cotton, oil, and some textile, and some regional tradings. But that said, the GDP of my country is growing steadily at 6% annually. And so that sounds good, but at the same time, a lot needs to be done. A lot more needs to be done to uplift that country. I myself was born in the country, left at the age as a teenager with a dream of bettering my education. Unfortunately, we all saw the idea of bettering self outside of the continent, and the hope is that the youth will stay and see its future within, within its own land. One thing that I like to stress is the idea of dreaming. And for the youth of Africa, dreaming, for me, is a progressive way of thinking that is vital and instrumental for one's advancement, for the advancement of your household, for the advancement of your community, and therefore uplift the future of your country.
You're naturalized American, yes? And
yes.
So you talk, your life is a lot, it's the American dream, but what we're talking about is creating the African dream. So let's talk about maybe your foundation. You're working on, a lot of what you're working on is connecting the African diaspora back home. How does that work?
My foundation was created to really uplift the Afro-descendants. The foundation was, of course, we started in 2020, the anniversary of 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade. But the point of the foundation is to bring healing to the triangle of the slave trade, which is Virginia, Liverpool, Richmond, Virginia, Liverpool in UK, and the west coast of Africa. There's so much that needs to be done. We're invested in the aspiration of the diaspora, the African diaspora. We're invested to, what's the word?
What you're doing, go ahead.
No, to bring healing to Afro-descendants. So, of course, we're invested socially and, spiritually, contrary to Global Citizen, who is invested, financially and economically. But that said, the role of my foundation is to be able to curate trips for Afro-descendants between the age of 18 to 29, for them to experience the rich heritage of the country.
Roots. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. The rich heritage of your roots.
Well,
right.
One of the great parts about this is how you use your platform. And again, you haven't forgot where you came from, and I think that's incredibly noble. Seppo, thinking about how we activate all those young people, I mean, entrepreneurship obviously is at the heart of it. Jaimin was referencing that too, that we give hope and we empower young people. How's Harith working to empower young entrepreneurs specifically?
I think, unless because that's a serious issue for the continent. I mean, as we've said earlier, the median age being 18, and that's like in excess of 50%, 40% of the population is like under 15. So we really need to find, innovative ways to how then do we create the inclusivity? How then do we create opportunities? How then do we also then create hope for all this energy within all these young people to sort of give them the hope that there's sort of, there's something beyond where they find themselves. And I think and our involvement, I think especially with Global Citizen, is especially premised on that thing of saying, how then do we get and agitate for policy across the continent that gets the leaders on the continent to do the right thing? And in the issue of working with young people to be able to do that and drive that change, I think is what we find attractive in agitating for those policy change, because you need the leadership that you have now to do something about that.
For summarizing that in one word, you'd say hope. Yeah. Hope is the word. We're out of time, but Jaimin, one word. If hope's one word, what's another? When we talk about the urgency of now, what's one word we could take away?
I would say become a true global citizen. I would say to be on the right side of history and to stand for social justice and embrace diversity.
Great way to end. Thank you both for everything you're doing. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Still to come, four-time Grammy winner Mickey Guyton and Second Gentleman of the United States, Doug Emhoff. Please welcome back author, seasoned Democratic strategist, and co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend, Simone Sanders Townsend.
I was just telling them this is like a pageant walk. It's a long walk. All right, a round of applause for that last panel discussion. We told you we were going to deliver today. So look, for some of the world's poorest countries, it is a critical lifeline for food, infrastructure, and education. It is the key to making sure everyone's basic needs are met, that our planet is flourishing, and every person in every country can prosper. What is the it I'm talking about? I'm talking about official development assistance, also known as ODA. And as we gather today, it's decreasing at a very alarming rate. You might not know the term ODA, but you might know the term foreign aid. That is exactly what we're talking about. Over the last 2 years specifically, two of the world's top donors, Germany and France, they announced more than 2 billion euros in cuts to their foreign aid. And traditional aid champions like the United Kingdom, Norway, and even Sweden have started cutting aid back at a time when aid is absolutely needed the most. Upcoming elections in Europe and right here in the United States, it could determine the global aid landscape for not only years, but decades to come. So that's what this next panel discussion is going to be about, and we have an amazing panel to do it. I first want to welcome to the stage with a large applause, Gargi Ghosh. She is the President of Global Policy and Advocacy at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Next, Wanguri Kuria, 2023 Global Citizen Prize winner and founder and CEO of Farmer on Fire Ltd. And last but not least, Stefan Löfven, the former Prime Minister of Sweden. People were like, woo woo. They're like, yes, this is the panel. This is the panel. Okay, we're talking about building a stronger world. Mr. Prime Minister, I want to start with you because one of the myths we really need to debunk is that foreign aid is charity. And we were talking about this in our walk down. We need to be clear, foreign aid is in fact not charity. And over the last 3 decades across the world, we have seen life expectancy actually increase by 7 years, while the number of people who are undernourished has declined. More than 2 billion people have gained access to safe drinking water, and the global literacy rate has improved by 11%. Those numbers, folks, mean that the money works. And it is also, I think we just need to break down where the money goes, okay? Sometimes it's going to organizations. Sometimes it is going domestically into countries like right here at home to buy things to send to other countries. How short-sighted is it not to invest in foreign aid, especially at this time?
Well, not investing is always short-sighted, and not doing so now is really, if you look at it, first we have to label it as investment. It's not charity, it's not just a simple cost, it's an investment. And often we do investment because we want something back. Now, we have a continent in the world, Africa, that will grow substantially in terms of population this century. And of course, if you give the people in the African states the same possibilities as in the richer part of the world, well, that's good for them, it's good for Africa, but it's good for the world economy. If you look what happened in China, and please, I do not like the Chinese system, but we have to acknowledge that they lifted some 300-400 million people out of poverty into some kind of middle class. That was good for them as individuals, it was good for China, but it meant something else. They are contributing in the economy, and it affects the world economy positively. So that's what we need to do now, and we need to also make sure that we do the investment that are required for the climate transition. And if we do not, that's the real cost. That's the cost when we cannot produce the food that we want to produce because the temperature has increased, let's say it's 2 or 3 degrees. That's the real cost that we need to keep an eye on and avoid by investing now. And lastly, let me also say, there is this narrative that is costly and that we don't have the resources. We have all the financial resources that are required in the world. If you just look at the top richest people in the world, their wealth, if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, and you come to number 6, and you have $1,000 billion net worth of wealth. And I'm not saying we're going to rob them, but I'm saying that is a clear signal that we have the resources in the world. Start investing. Solidarity means both that you have the empathy for others in other parts of the world, but you also get something back. Start investing.
It's not just good to do, it's necessary for our global economy. Gargi, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has been very, very vocal on the issue of foreign aid, the importance of foreign aid, and we know that every dollar cut from budgets has a real world impact. I mean, we can't talk about the climate crisis and the refugee crisis that is gripping the world and also not look at what is happening as it relates to foreign aid budgets being cut. Meanwhile, when you've got people who are doing the right thing, countries like Spain, right, they are not celebrated enough. So how can we build public support in key countries and also ensure the negative course is reversed here before it's too late?
Thanks for that. I guess what hurts me the most about the situation we're in now is that we actually know how to lift up communities and help people lift their own families up. If you just look at something as simple as kids who survive past their 5th birthday, that number has grown dramatically for every decade of my life, of most of our lives, and it's threatened. That progress is threatened. Almost any indicator I could pull out, from maternal health to hunger, is getting worse. So there's never been a more important time for the world's richest countries, philanthropies, to show solidarity with humanity. You just have to look at the newspapers and imagine what isn't getting covered to feel that connection. But you're right. I mean, the problem we have is that, well, if you're watching this, you probably already care or are inclined to care. We're not reaching the people outside of this room. We're not activating enough people to care about these issues, to make the case that foreign assistance is something to be proud of. So I think a lot about how we need to change the case we're making. How do we advocate differently? With all due respect, not spend so much time talking to each other, but reach out beyond that. And there are a few things I want us to be trying at the foundation. I hope you'll try with me. One is talk more about successes. We spend a lot of time talking about the giant challenges out there, and it leads people to do what you said in the opening, wonder, is the money working? If countries are still poor, has it all been worthwhile? And we need to be out there talking about the progress we have made and know how to make. Two, I think we need to start talking about the interconnectedness of our people and our economies, that foreign assistance actually includes the contributions of real people in our hometowns around this country. I'm not talking about Tide aid or any of the sort of less effective or bad words in the development space. But we have incredible global health research happening in universities around this country. We have a diaspora community that, as you just heard, cares a lot about lifting up countries around the world. We have to activate those groups. And lastly, I think we've got to be really clear that everything we're asking for is just a tiny slice of the pie. We, in my world, get so wrapped up trying to make impossible choices, like should we advocate for vaccination or food? That's a ridiculous choice.
It's crazy because you could do both.
It's crazy. And the reality is the most ambitious we've been on aid, the most ambitious goal we've set for ourselves is 0.7% of GNI. That comes from the World Council of Churches 50 years ago. 0.7% of GNI would be enough. Less than 1% of this country and a few other countries' GNI would be enough to cover everything we're talking about to give families a fair start.
Less than 1%. Let's drill down a little bit on the numbers, because when you make the point, Gargi, about it, we're not talking about, nobody's talking about 50%, 75%. These are, the numbers matter. Wangari, we know that smallholder farmers, they receive less than 2%, okay? 2% of global climate financing, which frankly already makes it difficult to address climate-related challenges on farms, and then even more so when you talk about supply chains. Can you describe for the audience here how cutting development assistance impacts the work that you do, and then the work of other farmers? And let's not even get in, we can even talk about the food shortage on this planet.
Yeah, so significantly smallholder farmers really do a lot towards the food security of the entire globe, not just for Africa and for the third world country. They contribute 30% while utilizing only 11%. So they are sustainable and they are climate smart, yet we disregard them. They are not represented well, they're not in unions, they're not, and for us as Farm on Fire is to first bring out the fire so that even when the aid comes, it finds people who are already in momentum and their mindset is in the right place, and they can be able to propel and own the projects and go ahead and make change. That being said, a lot has been done so far, so we want to say that something is happening on the ground. IFAD, all the non-government organizations, we are really seeing the changes on the ground, but still so much has to be done, especially now with the global issues of the war, lack of grain, climate change. We still need to do so much more so that we can pull everyone together. Remember, it's a food system. A system means that if one part misses, the entire thing collapses.
Gargi, I want to go back quickly to something you noted along those lines. This year, the World Bank is calling on donors to fully finance the IDA, which is the World Bank's fund that supports the 75 poorest countries to address basic needs. But funding the IDA should not come at the expense of supporting the work of organizations such as Gavi, right? So the Vaccine Alliance. So if you could just give me your 30-second pitch to donors about why it's not an either or. What do you tell these folks that say, we have to prioritize one issue over the other?
I think there's never been a better moment to show solidarity with people around the world by investing in the very basics to grow economies, grow livelihoods, and that's all we're talking about.
Very succinct pitch. Mr. Prime Minister, when you were Prime Minister of Sweden, you allocated 1% of Sweden's budget for ODA, that foreign assistance we're talking about. That was a record. Okay, so could you quickly tell us why you made that choice?
Well, of the same reasons that I spoke about before, because it is, as I said, an investment. For me, solidarity works in two ways. One is showing empathy to others, brothers and sisters around the world. But the other is that you give more people a possibility to a decent life. And when you do that, you have more people in education. And when we do that, we know we can accomplish so much more. And why not use the whole potential of the world? When we discussed gender equity, gender equality, we said the same thing. Hey, why not use 100% of the potential, making sure that everybody has a possibility to develop in the way she or he wants? This is the same thing. We have to understand that this is not a cost. You're not throwing away money. You are investing in something that is good for the people that you are investing in, but also for yourself. There will be a return on those monies. So make sure that the world can develop and we are all better off.
I like what Wangari said about the food system being a system, and I think that applies to many of the other discussions we're having today. And if one part of the system fails, the system does not work. Last question to follow up, Mr. Prime Minister. To recap, we know foreign aid works, okay? We know it's a small amount of a nation's budget, and we also know countries are cutting their budgets and lessening their commitments. So as we close, what is your specific message to them? What's your 30-second elevator pitch to make sure that they don't fail their part of the system?
Well, if you want to live in a world that is stronger, that is better also for you, you have to make sure that you contribute with investments. Because otherwise, the people that don't get these same chances, the same possibilities, they can't do what they can do if they also get lifted out of poverty. We have this obligation, and I think speaking of South Africa and southern parts of Africa, there is this expression, Ubuntu, that I like. Ubuntu is I am because of you. So that is something that for me it's natural. But if you can't see that, you must be able to see that if you invest in other people, that is something that is going to come back in a positive way.
And Wangari, lastly, in my 30 seconds I have left, as we like to tell people on television, what is your hope? I think we should end on hope.
For me, I would just like to tell my story. As I stand here, it's a great honor for Global Citizen to give me a platform to also reach other African farmers. The thing with agriculture is that it's a low-entry industry where people with very few resources can be able to come in. And by that skilling that we get from the local humanitarian organizations funded from this conversation we are having here, is that people can be able to have hope, can be able to have dignity, can be able to take their kids to school. So by that just one action, it sparks so many other things that leads to development, because the people get to own the process and they get to make decisions from then on, compared to when they were just hopeless and in abject poverty.
Please help me thank our panel. Former Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven, Gargi Ghosh of the Gates Foundation, and Wangari Korea for this excellent conversation. Thank you all so very, very, very much.
Please put your hands together for the editor-at-large and founding mother of the 19th, Erin Haynes.
Hello, everybody. How's it going? Okay. Let's do this. The UN Secretary General has declared gender equality as the unfinished business of our time, certainly something we agree with at the 19th, urging everyone to invest in women and girls for what he says will build a better world for us all. At the current rate of investment, it will take another 300 years for the world to reach gender equality in law and practice. 300 years. We don't have time to wait. Speeding up progress on this issue is one that is deeply personal for our next guests. So 4 years ago, Doug Emhoff and his wife, Kamala Harris, co-wrote a whole new chapter in US political history when she became our nation's first woman vice president, and he became the first ever second gentleman. Ever since he assumed that role, Emhoff has traveled to 37 states and 4 countries, detailing the Biden administration's efforts on everything from job creation to health care. but it is ensuring that true equality is achieved for women and girls worldwide that has been a major focus for the second gentleman. He's made it his mission to bring together world leaders, as well as everyday citizens, to talk through challenges and identify solutions that will empower current and future generations. And for Mickey Guyton, female empowerment has been at the heart of a trailblazing country music career. In 2021, she became the first Black woman solo artist to be nominated for a Grammy in country music. Yeah, we can clap for that, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. And as a female entrepreneur in the music industry, the now 4-time Grammy-nominated superstar has experienced firsthand many of the challenges that women face in the workforce. So please join me in welcoming the second gentleman of the United States, Doug Emhoff, and Mickey Guyton.
Hi, guys.
Okay, well, let's begin. Mr. Second Gentleman, I'm going to start with you. About a year and a half into your tenure as second gentleman, you told one of my colleagues at the 19th, I found where I can really make a difference is just trying to use my voice to lift women in leadership up. Why is this important to you? And what's been the reaction to how you've chosen to use your voice and your platform in this historic role?
Well, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having us. This is great. Look, I'm the first man to ever be in this role, married to the first woman ever to be vice president. So we start there. So, I had a very satisfying career as an entertainment lawyer in Hollywood. Great training to be second gentleman, by the way. And I loved it. I miss it. But I took a step back from that gladly and without bitterness, without saltiness, to make sure that I could support the first woman in that role. And then when you realize you have one of these microphones, you got to be responsible about how you use it. And so to be the first man in this role, married to the first woman, you have no choice but to speak up and speak out and talk about these issues that we know are not fair. Pay equity, childcare, family leave, reproductive freedom. Let me just mention what's going on right now. This Dobbs decision has created a crisis, a Donald Trump created crisis in this country. Look at what's happening in Arizona. Yes, it looks like begrudgingly the state legislature is changing it, but what are they changing it to? It's still a ban. It is still a ban with no exceptions for rape or incest. That is Donald Trump's America. My wife, the vice president, is in Florida today. First day of a 6-week ban. This is what is going on. So I am speaking out loudly on all of these issues, including this horrific crisis caused by Donald Trump with the Dobbs decision.
Yeah, and showing us that women's issues can be everybody's issues if everybody cares about them and everybody talks about them. Mickey, I want to come to you. To mark International Women's Day this year, you released a new song. I love the song called Woman, one that you say honors how women persevere through pain, setbacks, and doubt. You've talked openly about how you faced all three of those things, frankly, as you have navigated the country music industry. How have gender as well as race really influenced your journey?
Well, first of all, I brought receipts for stats for everybody. But as a Black woman pursuing country music, what people don't understand is country music is not only very hard to pursue as a Black woman, it is almost equally as hard to pursue as a white woman. And I will tell you the stats right now, why it's been so important for me to speak about this. So country radio really relies on airplay, and 8.64% of the airplay for women is songs by white women, and 0.24% for Black women, almost entirely just Beyonce's song, Texas Hold'em. So that alone should tell you why I am so passionate about gender equality in country music.
Yeah, I mean, how have fellow artists and fans really responded to your efforts to make change, right? To make country music a more inclusive space for women and for people of color?
Yes. You know, speaking out, it comes with a price.
Yeah.
My mental health alone has been really, really difficult, but it's so important, I think, in the industry entirely. People are really, really passionate about this. You know, if you have a daughter, alone, this should make you so passionate about this issue. If you have a mother, if you have a sister, a grandma, this is why it's so important. And the industry, as much as we're trying, we still have a very, very long way to go.
Yeah, such a good point you're making. You don't have to be a country music star to really care about this and try to do something about making so many spaces in our society more equal and more welcoming. Mr. Second Gentleman, you have said to me that you want your legacy to be more Kamala Harris's. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, we were talking about this backstage, kind of picking up on what you were saying, Mickey, how hard it is. And a lot of people think breaking barriers means you just start from here, la-di-da, and then all of a sudden you get to where you got to. And I've heard Kamala talk about this too, where, you know, when you break barriers, it means breaking. And when you break things, sometimes you get cut. And when you get cut, sometimes you bleed. But I know you would say this, and I know Kamala Harris would say this, Aaron would say this. It's worth it. Yeah. It's worth doing it. To be able to be in those positions, to set an example. So when I say I want more Kamala Harris's, I want more of you too as well, because we need more women in positions of power. We need more women in leadership, not just in government, but I come from the business world. I was talking to some of the executives here backstage. We need more women in business leadership, more women in military leadership, more women in educational leadership, you name it, we need more. And it's not that some guy is going to then miss out. It's not an either or. And some people think that way, like it's binary. It's not. It's good for everyone. So when you lift up women, you lift up the economy. When women succeed, we all succeed. And this is, saying I want more Kamala Harris's is just shorthand for all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it is certainly worth it to break barriers, but the work that both of you are doing is about getting us to a day where we don't have to do that anymore. Mickey, I want to come back to you because in a recent op-ed for the Grammys, one writer declared 2024 is the year of women in country music. Will they finally have their moment? Do you agree with that statement? In your opinion, what is the #1 thing that needs to happen by the end of this year for those words to become a reality?
The answer is no. I read you guys those stats. If you want me to read them again, I've got them. But we have a very, very, very long way to go. And in every workplace that we are in, like, women equality is so important no matter where you are. And I'm not sure what the answer is. I think one thing that we can do is be intentional with our consumerism and show corporations the monetary value in not only female work, Black women, and Black art. We need to be intentional with our consumerism because we can sit here in all these panels all day long and have these discussions and say what we wish we could do, but it really does start with us. Like, we can't rely on anybody else but us to support these artists, to stream these artists, to show up to their shows, to uplift women in your workplace that are trying to climb the ladder in their own respective professions. I think it's collectively, it has to start with you first.
Yeah, action and not just,
Yes.
voicing support. Absolutely. Well, we're almost out of time, you guys, but I want to close this out with a little fun rapid fire, if that's okay.
All right.
Okay? Okay, so Mr. Second Gentleman, your wife is the first female vice president. As you have mentioned, you are the first second gentleman. Mickey, you were the first Black woman solo artist to earn a Grammy nomination in a country category, so I want to hear about some of your firsts. Okay. All right, Mickey, first CD you ever bought?
I think it was Monica. Right? That was a good one. That was a good one.
Listen, that was a good time. Yes.
That one.
Yes. All right. What about you,
We're gonna
Mr.
get
Second
an
Gentleman?
impromptu performance here.
What about you?
They didn't have CDs when I bought my first
Vinyl.
So
when they did come out,
they
the
had
CD
these
you
things
bought.
called like vinyl, and since it was probably the Clash or Elvis Costello.
Listen, where's Clash Hive? Exactly. See,
it
you're
was
not
definitely
alone.
something punk rock related.
Mickey, do you remember your first time on stage? Like where were you?
Definitely church. You know, if you're from the South, your first stage is definitely in the choir at church.
Yeah. One of the songs you sang when you were on that stage, back in church when you were in Texas.
Probably His Eyes on the Sparrow.
Yeah.
I hear like
Yeah,
yes,
right.
yes.
All right, we're about to put, we might get a performance out of you before we get out of here. I don't know. Mr. Second Gentleman, what's the first book you remember that made an impact on you?
So I was thinking about that. It's probably Moby Dick, because I remember in middle school getting that assigned, and it was incomprehensible to me. And I still have a copy of it on my nightstand. I'm still wrestling with that book. And there's so much in there. There's so much in there that you can relate to any big problem that's going on in your life. So I'd have to say that one.
Wow, Moby Dick prepared you to be Second Gentleman, maybe. In a way.
who
We're
knew?
learning something
Who
here
knew?
today, people. Didn't know that. Mickey, what about you? First book that made an impact on you?
The first book, can I say two?
I mean, yes.
I really loved reading The Color Purple.
Yes.
And Black Like Me, written by John Howard Griffin. It actually inspired me to write a song called Black Like Me. And it was about a white man named John Howard Griffin who during the civil rights movement, darkened his skin through radiation to look like a black man and went to the South to see what it was like to be a black man during the civil rights movement.
And last one to both of you. What is the first step that you think that men should take to help build a more gender equal world?
I'll start. It is essential for white men specifically to start speaking and saying the things that so many of us have been saying. Like, when you speak, people will listen so much more. And it's time for you to stand up and say something. And say something to each other.
Well, before you answer, Mr. Second Gentleman, I'm wondering, for the white men that Mickey is challenging to do that, how do they take that first step? What's the first, just one thing they can do to start using their voice in the way that you have been using your voice and the platform that you have? You don't have to be Second Gentleman to do that, right? Everybody can do that right now. How do they start? What do they need to do?
And show that that this is not a safe space for you. Like a safe space for your bigotry and your misogyny, that you have to show people behind closed doors that may not think like you, that this is not a safe space to say and think the things that you may be speaking behind closed doors.
My turn?
Yep.
So I've spoken a lot about this. So I think one of the things I'm doing is doing it.
Yes.
So I'm trying to speak out very loudly on issues that men traditionally haven't. So again, we talked about gender equity, family leave, childcare. We talked about Dobbs. We talked about pay equity, retention in the work. There's so many things that a guy saying matters. But the other thing I say a lot too publicly is, don't just say you're being supportive. Be supportive. Because I get a lot of nods in the audience whenever I say this, because I know a lot of times somebody might think in their head that they're being supportive, but they're not actually doing the things that are required to be supportive. So that's speaking out and doing tangible activities that actually are supportive, not just words, but deeds.
Yeah. And calling out when others are being misogynistic.
And if you're in those closed doors, like, don't do it. It's not appropriate. Yeah. And call it out when it happens, because again, we've got to be honest. And also listen, too. Listening, we talk about all the time. Now that I've been in this position, there's a lot of people who are good at talking and talking and talking, but I think one of the great skills of a lawyer is being able to listen and understand like what is required in that moment. And I think this is one of those conversations where people just need to listen to what's coming back at them and really try to meet that moment and take action to help. Because like I said earlier, when we do this, one, it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. It's not fair that women in so many of these areas, Dobbs and others, are just treated less than. Yeah. It's just less than, and we're all supposed to be equal here. And so we have to take actions to make sure we really are equal, that those aren't just empty words, that we bring that into reality. So we all have to do that.
Yeah, well, thank you both so much. Listening, speaking, and acting, I mean, that is how we are going to get to gender equality and how we can be global citizens. What it means to be a global citizen, right, is to be somebody that is championing gender equality. So thank you both so much for your work in that area, and thank you all so much.
Please welcome family medicine physician and social media influencer, Dr. Mike Warshawski, founder and executive director of Moby Clinic and 2024 Global Citizen Prize recipient, Andrew Dembe, and the CEO of Gavi, Dr. Sanya Nishtar.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Mikhail Warshawski, but most people, because of my social media presence, know me simply as Dr. Mike. I have a passion for talking about immunizations, primary care, debunking misinformation, which is on the WHO's list of biggest problems we need to tackle in the healthcare landscape. And I mention immunizations because it's one of the world's most successful healthcare interventions. But because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had major disruptions to both routine childhood care, including immunizations, but also to basic healthcare needs. This is happening worldwide, and developing nations are suffering most. 1 in 5 children globally still do not have access to essential immunizations, and 50% of the world's population lacks access to basic health services. And I think with last week being World Immunization Week, today's discussion is extremely timely. I'm blessed to be on stage with 2 amazing individuals who are spearheading the world into a direction of health, of equity, and access to health care. So first question, I would like to ask Dr. Nishtar. You assumed the role as new CEO of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, just 6 weeks ago. And you're the first woman and the first individual from the Global South to lead the organization in its 24-year history. Round of applause. With your distinct perspective, how do you plan to attack this need for increasing access to basic healthcare needs?
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and let me begin by saying how deeply privileged I feel to be in a position to be able to touch the lives of people who are in a disadvantaged position. I've had that privilege in my country role as a Minister of Social Protection, and now I'm greatly humbled to be playing a small part at the global scale. So Gavi, as you know, is a very efficient, well-oiled, impactful machine that delivers results. Since its inception, it's delivered 1 billion doses of, it's immunized 1 billion children, it's halved child mortality, and it saved 17 million lives, and it's done at a very low operational cost with sustainability woven into its DNA with empowering countries and at the cutting edge of innovation. As we stand today, and as an incoming CEO, because that's what your question was, I see that we have a wide landscape of vaccines available today. We have no shortage of supply, and the world has never had so many vaccines in its portfolio with the ability to save lives and reduce suffering. I think the challenge is in delivering them. In the jargon of Gavi, we refer to zero-dose children. There are millions of zero-dose children who have never received any vaccination all across the world in different pockets. There is also the residual work after COVID-19, because the world was so focused, understandably, on COVID-19 that routine vaccination kind of took a backstage. And there's a need to further that work. And I've been to the African continent just 2 weeks ago, and I saw firsthand the challenges that exist in delivery. So part of what I will bring, in humility, part of what I'll attempt to bring to the table is to draw on my prior experience as a Minister of Social Protection, where I delivered welfare through end-to-end digital systems in a country with a population of 250 million and reached out to 15 million families with an end-to-end digital solution. And I think it is that efficiency of delivery that I will try to strive towards. I will try to draw on cutting-edge new innovations such as AI, which have the ability to really jumpstart processes which can be very transformative in making things more efficient and effective. And I will try to draw on new partnerships on the ground, because again, reflecting on my trip to the continent, to the African continent, countries are clearly signaling to us that they need coherence as far as the role of international partners are concerned. So a focus on digitization, a focus on new technologies, better leveraging partnerships, and of course very inspired by the previous panel, women have to be at the heart of it, especially at the country level.
Absolutely, cheers to that. I applaud you on the mission of going from 14 million children to zero-dose children, because that's an ideal goal for all of humanity. Andrew, your app, Moby Clinic, has done amazing work to support the immunization effort. In fact, in just 2 hours, you're going to be recognized as a 2024 Global Citizen Prize recipient. Big round of applause. Now, what Moby Clinic does is it connects community health workers with nearby doctors and clinics to expand healthcare access in places like Uganda, where you're from. Yes. How did you realize that a tool like that is important, and how did you implement it?
All right. First of all, I would like to thank Global Citizen for this platform. I'm very passionate about health equity, and I perceive the right to health to be the same as the right to life. The two are intertwined. So I witnessed this in the communities where I grew up. I come from Buyikwe, which is a rural area in Uganda, almost 70 kilometers away from the capital city. And while growing up there, I could see the disparities in access to care between the townships and the rural areas. And much of Africa, 80% of people live in rural areas. And so it's very prudent that we unlock access to care for them. So when I also started to traverse the sub-Saharan African countries in 2018, while doing some volunteering work with the African Union, I saw that this was a very pronounced problem, a huge problem. And I then got to start to investigate what are the underlying causes. And my team got to find two main issues. One, we have very few medics in Africa. In Uganda, where I come from, there is one doctor for every 25,000 people, far below what the World Health Organization recommends, that one doctor for at least 1,000 people. Then when you move to the second bit, the issue of distance, there are very few hospitals in these rural areas. And so we said, what can we do to circumvent these challenges that are bringing about lack of care for our people? So at Moby Clinic, we said, look, let's do two things. Let's stop whining about the problem and what we don't have, and let's begin a new era of using what we have on table. We have the people. Let's decentralize basic healthcare knowledge to the communities. Democratize it, include more willing community members to be skilled in terms of first-line care skills. And on top of that, let's use technology. Let's create a digital safety net. And how our app works is simple. Number one, it creates a digital safety net whereby these first-line caregivers that have been trained interface with doctors. So doctors in the comforts of their offices are able to remotely support the first-line caregivers. So that's one line. And then the second level is about integrated referral systems. We do not work in isolation. We onboard the existing facilities in the areas where we operate, private and public, and this helps in that a community health worker is able to know where to refer the patient. And also we have a future for critical emergency where a community health worker is able to call on ambulances in case of critical emergency. And most recently, we've included AI chatbot that has studied the patterns and supports in the interim when the doctor is not on the platform, but also we have included biometrics, facial biometrics, and the face of the patient is their password to their medical record. And this has supported continuity of care in communities. So that is how we've implemented it over the past 5 years, and to date we've managed to reach at least over 210,000 people despite the small resources at our disposal. Thank you.
Amazing. It sounds like there are a few through lines to both of your missions of making use of technology, making use of collaboration, and not just collaboration between the public and private sector, but also collaboration with the individuals, with the people who actually require those healthcare needs. Dr. Nishtar, this is a big year for Gavi, and we'll be watching on June 20th when you launch your replenishment campaign, where you look to finance Gavi's efforts for the next 5 years, but that work doesn't stop before then. So you're announcing something pretty significant today. Would you share that with us?
Yes, very much in the tradition of the Global Citizens Campaign. I have the honor and privilege to announce today that Gavi will be reaching out in 20 countries of Africa with and vaccinating 100 million children with measles and rubella. So I'm very pleased to announce this.
Thank you, Dr. Nishtar and Andrew, for being here. Big round of applause for all their successes and the important work that they're doing, all that essential healthcare needs to those in need. And for those of you here in the room or watching worldwide, join us to demand that world leaders fund Gavi to protect children from deadly disease. Head to the Global Citizen app to sign that petition. Together, we can protect the future of millions. Thank you.
Please give a big hand for anchor of Yahoo Finance, Julie Hyman, and the CEO of Bridgewater Associates, Nir Bardea.
Hi.
Hi. Hello to all of you. So let's jump right into it. We don't have a lot of time. You, just 48 hours ago, were in Kenya making an announcement with Hugh Evans and Ajay Banga of the World Bank. Tell us about the announcement and what happens now.
Okay, so this is really important, and I'm going to go and give a little bit of context before that to make it all make sense. So for those of you who don't know Bridgewater, Bridgewater is an asset manager that for decades has had the goal of dedicating our time to understand how the world works. And we take that understanding and then we translate that into advice for our clients and to manage portfolios. You know us. It's also true that over the years, we've also used that understanding and reflected back to policymakers, hey, this is what we think about the world. And this is how your decisions might impact what happens in the future. And when doing that, there's short-term things that we all think about. Powell's, we talked about Powell earlier today. Is the Fed going to tighten or not? But there's also very, very long-term phenomena that are very, very important to people that are trying to understand economies and markets. And we think that some of the most important long-term phenomena in the world are happening in Africa. So because of that, 2 days ago in Nairobi and earlier today here, Ajay Banga and the World Bank, Global Citizen and Bridgewater announced an economic summit that's going to happen in Cote d'Ivoire in October. And the goal of that economic summit is to bring heads of state, policymakers, great economists and investors to come together and discuss this outlook of what is the world going to look like in 50 years and what are we going to do about it. And a big part of that is the World Bank effort for the replenishment of IDA. IDA, the International Development Association, remember it? That is the way the World Bank lends money with low interest rates or grants to the poorest economies in the world in order to help them develop. I'm going to say one last thing about this, just so people get it. We say at Bridgewater that if you understand something, you kind of see how things happen over and over again. We call it another one of those. This is another one of those. We've had demographic changes in the world before. We've had areas that needed productivity booms. Think about China, think about India. The World Bank has also been in this movie before. We have countries like South Korea that in the 60s were beneficiaries of IDA. South Korea graduated from IDA in the 90s, and now it's one of the most booming economies, and it's contributing back to IDA. So we want to make sure we learn the lessons of history, and we help policymakers make good decisions, and for that, this economic summit in October is really important.
And talk to me about why now and why a hedge fund like Bridgewater is doing this partnership. Now, part of what you're providing is research and information, which is a really important piece, especially right now at a time when information and good information is sometimes difficult to come by.
Super important point. I mean, this is why I'm very excited about the partnership with Global Citizen, because we live in maybe the most prosperous time, not maybe, the most prosperous time of humanity. And at the same time, there's this extreme polarization. We talked about that earlier. There's extreme inequality. And there's a generational shift, or a generation growing into that, exposed to a wild amount of information where they can't sort signal from noise. So when you think about the partnership between Global Citizens and Bridgewater, Global Citizen really cracked something about how to take and harness the power of a generation and apply it to have impact on things that matter to them. There's a lot of Global Citizens here. Over a decade of activity of over 12 million Global Citizen members, mobilizing tens of billions of dollars of resources to where it's needed. And then when you couple that with Bridgewater, which is an organization that is solely focused on understanding what's actually true, how do things actually work? What is the signal in the noise? Then you get the pair of here's the understanding and here's the advocacy that could take that understanding and change the world. One last thing on that also. So I've been thinking a lot over the last couple of years on kind of how it used to be that the public sector was where people came together to kind of tackle humanity's biggest problems. And actually the private sector was very self-absorbed and siloed. And I think we all know that ship has sailed. The public sector is dysfunctional in a lot of ways. And today in private companies like Bridgewater, you see a very wide range of people and opinions coming together to tackle shared goals. So in that sense, I think that's the way for this generation to tackle things that they care about. And I think Hugh Evans from Global Citizen, I, and other people are just representatives of that with our teams.
I looked through some of the research that you all have put out already that is pertinent to all of this, and it's really interesting, but it also makes very clear how things in Africa can go in different directions, right? How you could have more growth there, potentially more productivity, or not. As your team was doing this research, what sort of stood out to you?
So, great, super important. This is a part of helping people understand what's going on, and I'll play the Bridgewater role, which is not my opinions, just the facts and the truths. So get ready for some numbers.
I
Today,
like numbers.
Me too. So today, 1/8 of the world's working age population lives in sub-Saharan Africa. And that number is growing because of a population boom by 30% each decade. And that's happening when in most of the rest of the world, there's a population decline. So play that out. That means that in the future, 3/4 of the growth in working age population is going to come from the continent. And it means that in my lifetime, 1/3 of the world's working age population is going to be in Africa. Let's just process that for a second and imagine what that world looks like. And now imagine two possibilities. One possibility is, okay, 1/3 of the world's working age population is in Africa. And in line with that, there was what we call a productivity boom, meaning it's not just more working hands, it's more skilled labor, more educated, that can produce more. That can lead to massive growth boom, really amazing for the continent, amazing for the world. We've seen this in other places. Think about the miracle of productivity in China or India, amazing. Now think about the other scenario of 1/3 of the world's working age population is in Africa and nothing happens. That's the course we're on right now, meaning no productivity boom. So now you have this massive population that has basically been left behind. Global inequality is a lot more dramatic than it is now. By the way, that's happening where climate change is going to hit the most. I just came back from Nairobi. There is a natural disaster right now in Kenya. There were disastrous natural disasters in Malawi recently. Think about the frustration of a generation and what that looks like and how that could completely destabilize the world. So that's your choice. And just to make that, again, tangible, when I'm saying productivity, because it's kind of a conceptual concept, in sub-Saharan Africa, half of the population don't have access to electricity. Half. In some countries, it's 75% of the population don't have access to electricity. 75%. This is the rest of the world, it's 90% that have access to electricity. When we say electricity, a lot of us kind of think internet, access to information. We're talking light bulbs. We're talking light bulbs. So imagine 1/3 of the working age population living in those terms. What does that look like? Every other conversation out of Global Citizen now in New York today is talking about machine learning and AI and ML and how a shrinking population on this side of the world is probably facing a once-in-a-generation productivity boom. In Nairobi, where I just came back from the African Heads of State Summit, nobody mentioned AI, ML. They didn't mention computers. They mentioned electricity and railroads. So it's going to matter. That thing is going to matter a lot, and being educated, making good decisions is going to determine what the world looks like in the next 50 years.
So what would based on the information, the numbers, and what you're saying, what then would be your call to action for the folks who are listening right now?
We need to make massive investments in infrastructure, healthcare, and education in the continent. A good start is doing that through IDA. And my call to action to all of you is get informed. Get informed, get off the couch, take action, put pressure on policymakers to make good decisions on these topics, because once the public sector leads the way, the private sector will follow. And we've seen that phenomena over and over again. So that QR code, by the way, scan it. It's going to lead you to be able to take action on the topics that I'm just describing.
So we just have about a minute left. I am curious, I mean, you sort of mentioned the role that the private sector is now playing, but talk to me for a moment, just personally, about you as a leader. Clearly, you're very passionate about this. Why is this important to you as the head of the world's largest hedge fund to be involved in this effort?
So I always say that leadership is kind of 3 components. It's getting a group of great people, coalescing them around shared values, and then putting impossible goals. I think that way about Bridgewater. It's the most incredible group of people. A lot of them are here, by the way. And this mission of trying to understand how the world works sounds unimaginable. I think about that way about all the global citizens that are here, trying to fight extreme poverty, climate change, can't be more ambitious. I think that way about the problems in Africa. And I know that people look at statements like that and they roll their eyes. They're like, this is idealistic, it's utopian. But think about what I just described and think about what's the alternative. A third of the world's working age population is going to be in Africa. 50% of them don't have electricity. You can sit on the couch, Theodore Roosevelt talk about the kind of the person in the arena. Leadership is getting as many people to be the person in the arena and to do incredible things. And I urge you to take action.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome national correspondent for CBS News and featured co-host of CBS Mornings, Vladimir Duthier, Cisco Executive Vice President and Chief People, Policy, and Purpose Officer, Fran Katsoudas.
Hey, so what an incredible first day here at Global Citizen Now. Give yourselves a round of applause. I don't know about you, Fran, but I feel more hopeful than ever that our future will be one where everyone's basic needs are met, our planet is flourishing, and every person and country can prosper.
Indeed, and day one was just the beginning. Tomorrow, world leaders, artists, and activists will continue the conversation, discussing ideas for urgent action to tackle the most pressing issues we all face.
But later this evening, we will close out the day, first day of Global Citizen, with the Global Citizen Prize hosted by yours truly, moi. It's a celebration of 6 young advocates from around the world who are meeting the moment in an innovative and inspiring way. And we've got an amazing, amazing show planned to honor these young changemakers, including a performance by 4-time Grammy-nominated singer Mickey Guyton. Yeah.
Okay, I am so excited about tonight. I cannot wait for you all to meet the 5 Global Citizen Prize winners and this year's Cisco Youth Leadership Award recipient. These young people are making a better tomorrow, and they're doing it today.
So, on that note, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. We'll see you back here promptly at 6 for the 2024 Global Citizen Prize.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes day 1 of the Global Citizen Now Summit. Please head to the 5th floor for cocktails and